Marlowe Tate was reviewing her company's quarterly numbers on a Sunday evening when she found the line that changed everything. It was not a large number. It was $312. A wire transfer she did not recognize, dated 3 Tuesdays ago, from the Cornerstone operating account to a holding account she had never seen before. She almost scrolled past it. She reviewed thousands of transactions a year. She was good at this. That, she would later understand, was exactly the reason her husband had needed her to stop looking closely. She opened a second tab, then a third. By 11:47 p.m., she had found 4 accounts she did not recognize, $2.3 million she could not place, and a Delaware LLC called Crestline Advisory Services, registered the previous August. Registered agent, a Wilmington Incorporation Service. Secondary contact, her husband, David Tate. Secondary contact, a woman named Priya Nair. She closed the laptop. She walked upstairs. She looked in on Camille, 9 years old, her father's coloring, her mother's eyes, asleep. She looked in on Zora, 6 years old, a graph paper floor plan half-finished on her nightstand. Marlowe had checked the math on it last Thursday. It was correct. She stood in the hallway between their rooms for a long time. Then she went back downstairs. She did not sleep. She opened the laptop again. This is what she found. This is what it cost the man who believed that marrying the person who built the company meant he could take the company and walk. Stay with her. The ending will not be what you expect. Before we go any further, if you are new here, this channel tells the stories of women who found the truth, built the case, and made sure justice was served every single day. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. This story is just getting started. Stay with me. Marlowe Simmons incorporated Cornerstone Creative Consulting, LLC, in the state of North Carolina on a Tuesday morning in March 2012. The registered agent was a Charlotte attorney named Constance Briggs, whom Marlowe had met once at a Howard graduation event and called 6 months later when she needed someone who would not charge her for the first conversation. She was 29. She had a Master of Business Administration from Howard University's School of Business, 6 years of agency experience in Charlotte's marketing corridor, and the specific clarity of a woman who had watched other people run companies badly for long enough to understand exactly what she would do differently. She had $4,000 in savings she had not touched since the previous October. She had a second bedroom she was not using. She had 3 clients who had followed her out of her last employer because they trusted her work more than they trusted the firm. She set up the LLC as a single-member entity. Managing member, Marlowe A. Simmons. No other members. The operating agreement she drafted with Constance's guidance specified that any future transfer of membership interest required the written consent of the managing member, Marlowe, and that any prospective member acquiring interest would do so by separate agreement, documented and notarized, at a valuation determined by independent appraisal. It also specified that any member found to have engaged in acts materially harmful to the company, including fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, or unauthorized diversion of company assets, would forfeit their interest as a condition of the agreement. Constance had insisted on that clause. Marlowe had agreed immediately. Neither of them thought they would ever use it. She was 29, and she had never been married, and she did not know yet why she was being so careful. She was just being careful. She met David Tate at a client networking event in Charlotte in the spring of 2015. He was in commercial real estate. He was charming in the deliberate way of someone who had practiced it long enough that the effort no longer showed. He asked about Cornerstone before he asked about Marlowe, what she had built, how she had grown it, who her anchor clients were. She thought this was a sign of genuine interest in the work. She understood later it was reconnaissance. They married in June 2017. Marlowe was 34. Cornerstone had 21 employees and $3.1 million in annual revenue. She did not add David to the LLC at the time of the marriage. The company had been incorporated 5 years before they met. Under North Carolina's Equitable Distribution Statute, NCGS Section 50-20, Cornerstone was her separate property, founded before the marriage, funded by her premarital savings and labor, structured with her name as sole managing member. She knew this. Constance had explained it clearly the week before the wedding, over coffee, at the office, without being asked. In January 2018, after 18 months of David working alongside Cornerstone's clients in a business development capacity, Marlowe offered him a formal role, Director of Business Development. Salary $140,000. Equity 30% minority membership interest, documented in a formal amendment to the operating agreement, notarized and filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State. The amendment also carried forward the forfeiture clause. Any member found to have engaged in fraud or material harm to the company forfeited their interest immediately. Constance had made sure of that. David signed without reading the forfeiture clause closely. Marlowe noticed that. She did not say anything about it. By December 2023, Cornerstone Creative Consulting LLC had 31 employees, $6.4 million in annual revenue, and a quarterly report that Marlowe had sent to her anchor clients with the specific quiet satisfaction of a woman who had built something from nothing and watched it compound into something she had not entirely planned for. It was the best year the company had ever had. David had contributed to it. He was good at the visible parts of the work: client acquisition, dinners, handshakes, follow-ups. He remembered names. He showed up. He made people feel that Cornerstone had serious, committed leadership at every level. Marlowe had never doubted that he was effective at the things other people could see. She had not looked at the things they couldn't. Crestline Advisory Services, LLC, had been registered in Delaware 4 months earlier, in August 2023, the same month Marlowe sent out the strongest quarterly report the company had ever produced. The initial deposit into Crestline's business account, $18,000, moved in 3 separate wire transactions of $6,000 each below the $10,000 FinCEN reporting threshold, timed on separate business days. The address registered to the account, a UPS store on South Boulevard, Charlotte. David visited it every third Tuesday between 11 a.m. and noon, arriving alone, leaving in under 8 minutes. He had been planning the exit since the day the quarterly report landed.
The transfer was time-stamped 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. It moved $312 from Cornerstone's operating account, a Wells Fargo business checking account Marlowe managed and David had co-signatory access to for operational purposes, to an account ending in 7741. The description field read CRS ADVSV, retainer draw. She had approved a vendor called Crestline Advisory Services in the company's books 18 months earlier. She had reviewed the initial contract David presented, signed off on a monthly retainer for business development consulting support, and seen the line item in every quarterly report since. She had not looked at the individual transaction level. She looked now. The Crestline retainer was documented at $12,500 per month. Over 18 months, that was $225,000, a number she had reviewed and approved in the annual budget as a legitimate external consulting expense. What she found when she pulled the full transaction history for account ending 7741 was not $225,000. It was $2,341,180. The difference, $2,116,880, had been moved in 187 separate transactions ranging from $800 to $41,000, each coded with a Crestline reference number in a sequence that had been incrementing steadily for 18 months. Each transaction had been authorized by David Tate using his co-signatory access from a company device during business hours. Each authorization had generated an email confirmation sent to a Crestline Gmail account that David controlled. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, every one of those email confirmations was a wire communication in furtherance of a scheme to defraud. There were 187 of them. Crestline Advisory Services, LLC, had been registered in Delaware on August 14, 2023. Delaware incorporation required no disclosure of beneficial ownership at the state level, a feature David had clearly researched because the registered agent was a Wilmington incorporation service, not a named individual, and the only identifiable address was the UPS store on South Boulevard that resolved when Marlowe searched it at 12:31 a.m. to a mailbox rental. She found Priya Nair's name in the secondary contact field of the Crestline Articles of Organization, a field not required but present, filled in during an amendment filed 4 months after the original registration. Marlowe searched the name. Priya Nair, owner of Strata Design, a boutique Charlotte interior firm. Former Cornerstone client, relationship managed by David beginning in 2021. She had referred 2 additional clients in 2022. Marlowe had appreciated her without paying close attention. She pulled the phone records on their shared family plan, a plan in Marlowe's name, which she paid for, which she had every legal right to review. The records showed 1,847 calls and messages between David's number and Priya Nair's number over 26 months. The pattern was consistent, contact increasing in the 2 weeks following each large Crestline transfer, contact dropping in the week before Cornerstone's quarterly reviews, when David would have needed to be attentive and present and entirely above suspicion. Marlowe closed the laptop at 2:14 a.m. She sat at the kitchen table without moving for 11 minutes. Then she went upstairs and stood in the hallway between the girls' rooms. Camille's door was slightly open. Zora's floor plan was on the nightstand, half finished. Marlowe had checked the math on Thursday. It was correct. She went back downstairs. She did not sleep. She called no one for 48 hours. She worked. She pulled 18 months of vendor payment records, cross-referencing every Crestline invoice against documented deliverables, building a timeline in a spreadsheet she saved to a Google account David had no access to, an account she had created in 2019 for personal financial documents and never mentioned. She photographed every invoice David had submitted on Crestline letterhead. She screenshotted every transaction. She did not print anything. She did not want him to notice the printer had been used. She also found the tax exposure on Monday afternoon. Cornerstone had filed 3 years of federal corporate tax returns under David's financial oversight, claiming Crestline's invoices as legitimate business deductions, $225,000 a year of documented consulting expenses. The deductions had been filed using Marlowe's digital signature, which she had authorized for the purpose of accurate and timely filing. The underlying vendor was not a real company, which meant Cornerstone had claimed $675,000 of fraudulent deductions on returns David had prepared and submitted in the company's name. The IRS had not flagged it. That would not last. She made dinner on Monday. David talked about a prospective client in Raleigh he was developing. She listened with the focused attention she had always given important things and understood in real time that she was listening to a man describe a life he was running in parallel to the one he was dismantling. She said goodnight at 10:15. She went upstairs. She kept working.
She called Constance Briggs at 6:45 a.m. on Wednesday. David was in the shower. Marlowe was in the kitchen with her personal phone, the spreadsheet open on her personal laptop, and the specific composure of a woman who had spent 48 hours preparing for this conversation. Constance answered on the second ring. Marlowe said, "I need to come in before your staff arrives. I have something you need to see in print." Constance said, 7:30, come to the side entrance. She did not tell David she had an early meeting. She said she had a client call she needed to take from the office. He said, "Okay, drive safe." He was still in the bathroom. She drove across Charlotte in the October morning with the spreadsheet on a USB drive and the phone records printed and folded in her coat pocket, and nothing in her face that she had not decided to put there. Constance Briggs read for 26 minutes without speaking. She reviewed the spreadsheet, all 187 transactions, the timeline, the delta between the approved retainer amounts and the actual transfers. She reviewed the Crestline LLC filing documentation. She reviewed the phone records. She reviewed the 3 years of Cornerstone corporate tax returns Marlowe had printed from the company's accounting software, with the Crestline deduction lines highlighted. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Before I tell you what we are going to do, I need to tell you what he has done, precisely because the language matters for everything that follows." Under NCGS 14-90, David has committed embezzlement. He was entrusted with co-signatory access to company funds as a condition of his employment and his membership interest. He converted those funds to his own use through fraudulent vendor invoices he controlled. The amount exceeds $100,000 by a factor of 27. That is a Class C felony in North Carolina. Class C felony embezzlement carries a mandatory active prison term. There is no probation eligible at that threshold. He will go to prison if we build this case correctly. The electronic transfers, every one of those 187 wire authorizations sent from a company device through Wells Fargo's banking portal and confirmed by email, those are wire communications in furtherance of a fraud scheme. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, that is federal wire fraud. Each transfer is a separate count. The FBI will want this. The amount and the method, shell company, structured transfers, false vendor invoices, is exactly their profile. The tax exposure is real and urgent. Cornerstone claimed $675,000 in fraudulent deductions over 3 years on returns David prepared. The IRS can assess those deductions against the company unless we make a voluntary disclosure before they find it themselves. We go to them first. We present the fraud evidence. We establish Cornerstone as the victim, not the participant. On the divorce side, Cornerstone was incorporated before your marriage. It is your separate property. His 30% interest was granted during the marriage. It is marital property. But the forfeiture clause we put in the 2018 operating agreement activates upon execution of the civil settlement agreement, which formally documents the fraud in a binding legal instrument. The moment he signs the settlement, he forfeits the membership interest. By the time the family court looks at equitable distribution, there is nothing of his left to distribute. It was already gone the day he signed. She put her pen down. I need a forensic accountant, a tax counsel, a family law specialist, and a direct contact at the FBI Charlotte field office. I can have all 4 by Friday. Do not move anything. Do not change anything at home. Do not tell him. How long can you maintain normal? As long as I need to, Marlowe said. She drove home through the Charlotte morning. The city was fully awake now. School drop-offs, commuters, the ordinary machinery of a city moving through its day. She thought about the operating agreement amendment from January 2018. She had signed it at a conference table in this same law office, David beside them, the notary behind them. The forfeiture clause was Constance's idea, inserted the way experienced attorneys insert protective language, without drama, without explanation, as though it were obvious, which it was. It just hadn't seemed urgent at the time. She thought about the tax returns. 3 years of filings submitted under her digital signature. She had authorized that signature for the purpose of accurate and timely filing. He had used it for something else, had used it to build a legal problem inside her company and attach it to her name. She parked in the garage at home. David's car was gone. He had a meeting in Raleigh. She went upstairs to the home office. She opened the spreadsheet. She kept working. At 2:45 p.m., her phone buzzed, a text from the family law specialist Constance had retained, confirming that the divorce complaint had been drafted under NC's no-fault separation statute and would be filed simultaneously with the civil lawsuit and the criminal referral, timed so that David received all 3 on the same day, through the same coordinated process with no warning and no time to move assets. Marlowe read it. She responded, confirmed. She kept working.
Dr. Adiyize Okonkwo submitted her preliminary forensic accounting report on a Thursday, 14 days after Constance retained her. The report was 87 pages. Marlowe read it at the home office desk while David was at a client dinner in Raleigh, the door closed, the girls asleep. The Crestline scheme was the largest component, $2,341,180 across 187 transactions over 16 months, August 2023 through the month of discovery, routed through fraudulent invoices for consulting services that were never rendered, authorized by David using his co-signatory access, coded with sequential Crestline reference numbers that created the appearance of a functioning vendor relationship. Meridian had preceded it by 8 months and continued running in parallel. The 26-month total span covered both structures from Meridian's first transaction in November 2022 through the Sunday evening Marlowe found the $312. There were 2 additional structures. The first, a Delaware LLC called Meridian Consulting Group, registered in November 2022, 8 months before Crestline, the same UPS store address on South Boulevard. Meridian had been the test. David had run $267,000 through it over 14 months to establish that the structure worked, that the invoice coding held, that no one looked closely at the accounts payable line. When Meridian held, he registered Crestline in August 2023 and scaled. Both LLCs operated simultaneously for the final 10 months of the scheme, Meridian winding down as Crestline absorbed the volume. The second additional structure, $190,000 in charges on a Cornerstone American Express David had applied for in 2021 using his signatory authority, with Marlowe's name on the account, but statements routed to a P.O. box she did not know existed. Total documented, $2,978,880 over 26 months. She reached page 61 at 11:23 p.m. Dr. Adieze Okonkwo had written, "The structure of this scheme demonstrates sophisticated knowledge of both financial reporting thresholds and corporate tax deduction mechanics. The perpetrator understood how to move money at amounts that would not trigger automatic review, how to document fraudulent vendor relationships well enough to pass routine internal scrutiny, and how to create paper trails that would require forensic-level analysis to unravel. This was not impulsive, this was built." Marlowe set the report down. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she kept reading. Constance filed the voluntary disclosure with the IRS voluntary disclosure practice on a Monday, 3 days after receiving Dr. Okonkwo's report. The package included the forensic audit, the documented timeline of Crestline and Meridian's creation and operation, the evidence that David had submitted the fraudulent deductions using Marlowe's digital signature without her knowledge of the underlying fraud, and a formal legal brief arguing that Cornerstone was a victim of internal fraud, not a willing participant in a deduction scheme. What the voluntary disclosure does, and what Constance knew it would do, is create a documented record that Cornerstone identified the problem, disclosed it proactively, cooperated fully, and provided the forensic evidence establishing its role as victim. That record is the difference between the IRS assessing penalties against the company and the IRS assessing them David personally. The IRS opened a review the following week. Constance told Marlowe, "This will take time, but the record is made. The direction of this is established." "How long?" Marlowe said. "Months," Constance said, "but we are on the right side of it." "Good. What's next?" She sat at the kitchen table that evening and thought about the 3 years of corporate filings submitted under her digital signature. She had authorized that signature for accuracy. He had used it for something else entirely, had used it to build a liability inside her company and attach it to her name, and then had filed the returns on time and without errors so that nothing would be noticed until someone looked at the wrong level of detail. She thought about the word Constance had used, established. The record is made. The direction of this is established. She had been building companies since she was 29 years old. She understood what it meant when the foundation was correctly laid. You build from there. You do not deviate. You follow the structure. Zora came in from the living room with a new floor plan. She put it on the table in front of Marlowe and said, "I changed the kitchen. I made it bigger. Can you check the math?" Marlowe checked the math. It was correct. She told her it was excellent.
Special Agent Diane Cole arrived at Constance's office on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Marlowe's first visit. She was alone. She wore a dark blazer, carried a thin folder, and introduced herself with the economy of someone who had given her credentials so many times that the words had become entirely neutral. She sat across from Constance and Marlowe at the conference table and placed a single document between them. It was a FinCEN Suspicious Activity Report, a SAR, filed by Wells Fargo 18 months earlier, flagging a series of structured electronic transfers from a business account to a Delaware LLC. The transfers had each been under $10,000, spread across separate business days in a pattern consistent with structuring, the deliberate breaking of larger amounts into smaller ones to avoid the $10,000 currency transaction report threshold. FinCEN had referred the flag to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Charlotte. The Bureau had opened a preliminary inquiry. The inquiry had stalled at the Delaware LLC registration. Crestline Advisory Services had a registered agent, an EIN, and a mailbox address, and under Delaware's LLC non-disclosure statutes, the beneficial owner's identity was not publicly accessible without a court order. "We have had this account flagged for 18 months, Agent Cole said. We could see the structure of the scheme. We could not see who was running it." She looked at the forensic report in front of her. She looked at Marlowe. "You have the beneficial owner, the authorization trail, the vendor invoice documentation, and the tax filing evidence all in one package. That is every element of a federal wire fraud indictment. I need to take this back to my supervisor today. We will have a warrant for David Tate's financial records by the end of the week." The federal search warrant for David Tate's personal and business financial records was issued by a U.S. magistrate judge in the Western District of North Carolina on Friday morning. The warrant authorized the FBI to obtain records from Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and American Express, covering all accounts in David Tate's name, all accounts associated with Crestline Advisory Services, LLC, and all accounts associated with Meridian Consulting Group, LLC, dating back to January 2021. The execution of the warrant was coordinated with Constance's office so that service on David would occur simultaneously with the civil lawsuit filing and the criminal referral to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney. Marlowe had one request when Constance walked her through the timing. She did not want to be home. She did not want to be at the office. She wanted to be somewhere ordinary, somewhere that mattered regardless of what happened on that day. She scheduled Zora's parent-teacher conference for the same afternoon. She had maintained normal for 6 weeks. She had made dinner. She had asked about his day. She had said good night. She had run the weekly team check-in at Cornerstone and reviewed client proposals and approved a vendor invoice, a legitimate one from a real company for real services rendered, and gone to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday mornings and picked Camille up from soccer practice and checked Zora's floor plans on the weekend. She had been, from the outside, exactly what she had always been, the woman running the company, the household, everything. Inside, she had been building a case that would take a man apart with his own documents. She drove to Zora's school. She parked. She went in and sat across from the teacher and heard that Zora was doing well, creative, persistent, very good with spatial reasoning, the teacher said, which made Marlowe smile. She was still talking about Zora's progress when her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She did not look at it. She looked at the teacher. She finished the conference. She thanked the teacher. She walked to her car. She sat in the parking lot and looked at her phone. 14 missed calls from David Tate. She put the phone in the cup holder. She drove home. Constance's office sent a formal legal notice to Priya Nair's registered business address on the Monday following the warrant execution, informing her that she had been identified as a recipient of funds from Crestline Advisory Services, LLC, a company now under federal investigation, and that civil proceedings were being initiated in Mecklenburg County Superior Court. The notice advised her to retain counsel immediately. Priya Nair retained an attorney by 3 p.m. that day. Her attorney contacted Constance's office at 9 a.m. Tuesday. The call lasted 12 minutes. Priya's attorney said, "My client has documents. She has kept records of every transfer she received from Crestline, every communication David Tate sent her regarding the company's purpose and structure, and a recorded phone call from 8 months ago in which David Tate described Crestline as, quote, a consulting business I set up to handle overflow work from real estate contacts. It has nothing to do with Marlowe's business. She recorded it because the description did not match the amount of money being deposited, and she did not know what to do with the discrepancy. We will need everything, Constance said. Original documents, original recording, certified bank records, sworn statement. Can your client have that ready by Thursday? Priya's attorney said she already has it ready. She has been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Priya Nair's document package arrived by secure courier on Thursday morning. It contained 31 months of bank statements showing $340,000 in deposits from Crestline's account, labeled in her own records as business income, DT. A folder of text messages from David in which he described Crestline's purpose in consistently legitimate-sounding but strategically vague language: overflow consulting, management fees, real estate contacts, and the recording, 8 minutes and 42 seconds, captured on a Thursday evening 8 months ago, in which David said, without being asked directly, that Crestline was a structure he had set up separately and had nothing to do with Marlowe's business. He had said it without being asked. He had said it because she had begun asking a question that made him nervous, and he had answered the question she had not yet finished. Priya had recognized that. She had pressed record before she finished asking it. She had been keeping the recording for 8 months. North Carolina is a one-party consent state under NC Gen Stat Section 15A-287. Only one party to a conversation needs to consent to its recording for it to be lawful. Priya was a party to that call. The recording was fully admissible. When Constance's tax counsel reviewed it on Friday afternoon, she used one word: airtight. Under NC's Joint and Several Restitution Statute, Priya's receipt of $340,000 created civil liability regardless of her knowledge of its source. She had benefited from the fraud whether or not she participated. The civil judgment would stand, but the recording, David explicitly stating the money had nothing to do with Marlowe's business, on a lawfully made call Priya had initiated for exactly this purpose, was the kind of evidence that closes federal criminal cases. The U.S. Attorney's Office declined criminal charges against Priya Nair in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. The civil judgment for $340,000 remained. She knew this. She cooperated anyway. Constance called Marlowe on Friday evening after the girls were in bed. She said, "Priya's package is complete, and we have forwarded the cooperation agreement to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The federal case is fully documented. Agent Cole says they will present to a grand jury within 60 days. She said, "I need to ask you something about the divorce strategy. David's personal financial records, subpoenaed through the warrant, show approximately $340,000 in personal accounts outside of Crestline and Meridian. That is marital property. The divorce proceeding will address it, but the question is how we structure the settlement demand relative to the criminal timeline. We push for a negotiated settlement before indictment. He will take it because before indictment he still believes he has room to negotiate. Or we wait for the indictment, let the criminal case collapse his position entirely, and come to the table when he has nothing left." "What does waiting cost him?" Marlowe asked. "Everything," Constance said. "The forfeiture clause in the operating agreement activates upon execution of the civil settlement. The moment he signs, the membership interest is gone. We do not need a conviction to trigger it. We need his signature on the settlement, which his attorney will deliver the moment the indictment lands, because he will have nothing to negotiate with. The criminal restitution order will also attach to every personal asset he has, including the $340,000 in personal accounts. The family court will address those in equitable distribution, and because he has committed fraud against the marital estate, the court has grounds under NCGS 50-20 to distribute those assets entirely to you as the injured spouse. By the time we sit down after the indictment, he will accept every term we bring. We wait, Marlowe said.
The federal grand jury in the Western District of North Carolina returned a true bill on a Tuesday. The indictment named David Randall Tate on 26 counts of wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Each count representing a separate electronic transfer above $5,000, each electronic transmission constituting a separate wire communication in furtherance of a scheme to defraud. Under federal sentencing guidelines, each count carries up to 20 years. The government was not seeking the maximum on each count. They were building toward a plea. But the indictment established the full scope of the scheme in a public document, and the public document was now filed. The same week, the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office filed a state-level charge under NCGS Section 14-90, one count of Class C felony embezzlement of $2,798,880 from Cornerstone Creative Consulting, LLC. Class C felony. Mandatory active prison term, no probation available at that amount under North Carolina's structured sentencing grid for a defendant with no prior record. The grid does not care about circumstances, it cares about the amount and the record. The amount was $2.7 million. The record was clean. The sentence would be active. Additionally, the state filed one count of money laundering under NC Gen Stat Section 14-118-8, North Carolina's Anti-Money Laundering Act, enacted June 28, 2024, for knowingly engaging in financial transactions involving the proceeds of criminal activity through shell company structures designed to conceal their source and ownership. The statute does not apply retroactively. It applies only to transactions conducted after its effective date. David had registered Crestline 10 months before the law took effect, but he had continued routing proceeds through both Crestline and Meridian after June 28, 2024, generating 14 qualifying post-enactment transactions, each one conducted with full knowledge of the investigation now surrounding him, each one a separate act of laundering under the new statute. The state charged one count. One was enough. Federal agents and Mecklenburg County Sheriff's deputies arrived at Cornerstone's Charlotte offices at 2:15 p.m. on a Wednesday. They served the warrant in the main conference room, the room with the Cornerstone logo on the wall and the quarterly revenue chart on the whiteboard from Monday's team meeting, and the chairs where David had sat across from clients for 5 years and shaken hands and said the right things. 3 Cornerstone employees were present when they arrived. The arrest took 11 minutes. Marlowe was at Camille's soccer practice. She had positioned herself on the sideline with the other parents, Zora beside her eating a granola bar, Camille in the field doing something determined with a ball. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket at 2:17 p.m. She did not look at it. She looked at the field. She watched Camille run. At halftime, she took out the phone and read the text from Constance. "It's done." She put the phone back in her pocket. She looked at Camille running toward the sideline. She did not cry.
She was not built for that to be the moment that broke her. She had already done the breaking, alone at a kitchen table at 2:14 in the morning, and put herself back together before anyone else was awake. There was nothing left to break here. There was only the field, and Camille running, and Zora asking if she could have another granola bar. Marlowe said yes. She handed her the granola bar. She watched the second half. David's attorney called Constance's office on 8:47 a.m. Thursday morning. The call lasted 4 minutes. He said, "My client is prepared to discuss a global settlement resolving the civil action, the equitable distribution proceeding, and, through a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors, a significant reduction in the criminal exposure. He is prepared to make full restitution of the documented amounts and to vacate the Cornerstone membership interest as part of the settlement." "What is your proposed restitution figure?" Constance said. $1.8 million. "Not yet," Constance said. She ended the call. She called Marlowe and relayed the conversation. Marlowe said, "What is our number?" Constance said, "Full documented restitution, $2,798,880. Joint and several with Priya Nayar's $340,000 civil portion. Full forfeiture of the 30% membership under the operating agreement clause. The certified business appraisal Constance had commissioned values Cornerstone at $6.4 million on a 1x revenue multiple standard for consulting firms. His 30% is $1.92 million, offset against the civil judgment. No non-disparagement agreement on your side. No cooperation reduction on the criminal case. The federal sentencing proceeds on the plea as documented." Marlowe said, "Send it."
David's attorney called back on a Tuesday morning, 61 days after the first call. He said, "My client accepts the terms as presented, all of them." Constance said, "I will need that in writing by end of business today, signed by your client in the presence of a notary, with a concurrent statement from his private defense counsel confirming the criminal plea agreement is proceeding on parallel terms." The signed acceptance arrived at 4:47 p.m. Constance called Marlowe at 5:02. She said, "He took everything." Marlowe said, "Good. What's the timeline?" Civil settlement executes at signing. The civil complaint was filed simultaneously with the civil lawsuit today. David was served all three at the same time, which means he cannot claim he was unaware of any proceeding. The family court will process the separation agreement, which is already written, within 90 days. The criminal plea hearing is in 3 weeks. The Mecklenburg County DA has agreed to hold the state embezzlement charge in abeyance pending the federal plea, standard practice under the dual sovereignty doctrine when both jurisdictions are pursuing the same conduct. If the federal plea and sentencing satisfy the DA's office, they will enter a nolle prosequi on the state charge. If for any reason the federal case collapses, the state charge stands independently. Either way, he is not walking out of this without a conviction and an active prison term. Sentencing 60 days after the plea. What about the IRS review? Still open. I expect clearance within 30 days. Marlowe said, "I'll wait for that one in person." The federal plea hearing was held on a Thursday morning in the Western District of North Carolina courthouse. The courtroom was quiet and institutional and entirely indifferent to the specific weight of what it was processing. The assistant U.S. attorney read the charges. The judge asked David if he understood the plea agreement. He said yes. The judge asked if the plea was made voluntarily and without coercion. He said yes. The judge asked him to state, in his own words, what he had done. He said, I authorized wire transfers from my employer's business accounts to accounts I controlled through companies I had registered, using fraudulent vendor invoices I created over approximately 26 months. I knew the transfers were unauthorized. I knew the invoices were false. I did it to obtain money I was not entitled to. The judge accepted the plea. 2 counts of wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. 1 count of money laundering under N.C. Gen Stat. .14.118.8 as incorporated into the federal plea agreement. Sentencing in 60 days. Marlowe sat in the gallery. She had come because Constance told her the statement would be read aloud in open court, and Marlowe had said, "Then I want to hear it said out loud." She sat in the 3rd row in a dark coat and listened to David Tate describe, in his own words, what he had done. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at her. They walked out of the federal courthouse into the cold Charlotte afternoon. Constance was beside her. The city was indifferent and bright and moving through a Thursday the way cities move through ordinary Thursdays. Constance's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. She said, "The IRS closed the Cornerstone review this morning. No corporate penalty assessment. All disallowed deductions assessed against David Tate's personal tax liability. The company is clear." Marlowe stood on the courthouse steps. She thought about the $675,000 in fraudulent deductions filed under her digital signature. She thought about the voluntary disclosure filed before the government found it. She thought about Constance sitting across from her at 7:30 in the empty conference room the first morning and saying, "The direction of this is established." The direction had held.
The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday in November, 62 days after the plea. The federal courtroom was the same room, the same institutional light, the same indifference. The assistant U.S. attorney presented the full forensic record. Dr. Okonkwo testified for 40 minutes regarding the scope of the scheme, the methodology, the documentation of the transfers, and the calculated harm to Cornerstone Creative Consulting, LLC, and its 31 employees. Constance submitted a victim impact statement on behalf of Marlowe and the company, written, not read aloud, because Marlowe had decided she did not need to perform her damage in front of a room. The document was in the record. That was enough. The judge sentenced David Randall Tate to 84 months, 7 years, in federal prison, within the U.S. sentencing guidelines range for the offense level and 0 criminal history points, adjusted upward for the sophisticated nature of the scheme, the extended duration, and the deliberate exploitation of a position of professional and marital trust. Full restitution, $2,798,880. The sum of $2,341,880 from Crestline, $267,000 from Meridian Consulting Group, and $190,000 in fraudulent credit card charges, jointly and severally liable with Priya Nair's civil settlement of $340,000. Supervised release of 3 years following completion of sentence, with the condition that David Tate is permanently barred from serving as an officer, director, member, or financial signatory of any business entity incorporated or operating in North Carolina for the duration of supervised release. Crestline Advisory Services, LLC, and Meridian Consulting Group, LLC, were both dissolved by court order the same day. The court officers moved toward him. He stood. He turned slightly, not fully toward the gallery, just the half-turn of a man who needed to do something and did not know how to do it completely. He looked at the gallery. He looked at Marlowe. He looked away. He did not look back. The restitution payments began in December under the court order. Structured monthly amounts from David's personal accounts, now frozen and administered by a federal trustee, with the judgment lien attached to any future income or asset acquisition for the duration of the supervised release period. Priya Nair's civil settlement of $340,000 was paid in full in January from her personal accounts, as negotiated by her attorney in exchange for the criminal declination agreement. The Cornerstone Operating Agreement amendment removing David Tate as a member had been filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State on the day of the civil settlement execution. Marlowe was again the sole managing member of Cornerstone Creative Consulting, LLC, 100% owner, the way she had incorporated it 11 years ago in the second bedroom on a Tuesday morning in March, with a client list of 3 and $4,000 in savings she had not touched since October. She closed Cornerstone's strongest fiscal year on record in December, $7.4 million in revenue, 33 employees, a new anchor client relationship with a regional development firm David had always dismissed as too small to pursue. She had pursued it herself in September, 3 weeks after the civil settlement, because she had the bandwidth now and the clarity that comes from having removed the thing that was consuming both. Camille is 10. She is in an advanced reading program at her Charlotte school and has written a story for a class project about a girl who finds a set of architectural drawings hidden in the walls of a house and uses them to rebuild it differently than it was built before. Marlowe has read it 3 times. She put it on the refrigerator. Zora is 7. She has moved from graph paper to drafting paper. She uses a ruler now. She has decided the kitchen in her latest floor plan needs a larger window, she told Marlowe on a Tuesday evening, because the light matters for how you feel in a room. Marlowe told her that was exactly right. Zora asked her to check the window dimensions against the exterior wall. The dimensions were correct. Marlowe goes to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 5:45. She has dinner with her sister on Sundays. The kitchen table is just a kitchen table. The chair at the end where David used to sit holds Zora's backpack and Camille's soccer cleats and a library book. The kitchen has been reorganized around what is actually in it. She sat across from both girls on a Tuesday evening in January, listening to Zora explain the window, the light, the dimensions, why the kitchen needs more of the morning, with the full attention she had always given important things. Camille was reading beside her, one eye on the conversation. The house was warm. Charlotte outside was ordinary and dark, and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened inside it. She was not happy in the simple, uncomplicated way she had been before. She was something more specific and more durable than that. A woman who had found the floor of the worst thing twice and come back up both times with the full knowledge of how deep it went, and used that knowledge to make her more precise about what she protected and less patient with what she did not. The company is hers. The table is hers. The kitchen is hers. The girls are explaining the window. It is entirely enough. She found $312 on a Sunday evening and followed it to $2.7 million, 2 shell companies, a federal wire fraud indictment across 26 counts, a Class C felony embezzlement charge under North Carolina law, a money laundering count under a statute that had been in effect for less than 2 years, and a forensic accounting report that left no version of David Tate's story standing. He spent 26 months building an exit from a company he did not build. He registered his shell companies in Delaware because Delaware does not require beneficial owner disclosure. He kept his transfers under $10,000 because he had researched the reporting thresholds. He used a UPS store address because he had thought about what would happen if someone came looking.
He filed fraudulent tax deductions in the company's name because he controlled the returns and he trusted that she trusted him. He was careful. He was methodical. He was very good at the architecture of the thing. He was not good enough. Marlowe Tate maintained 6 weeks of ordinary, dinner, good night, check the math on the floor plan, while building a case file that Constance Briggs handed to the FBI, the IRS, and the Mecklenburg County District Attorney on the same morning. The FinCEN flag that had been sitting in an FBI file for 18 months finally got the beneficial owner's name. The IRS voluntary disclosure protected Cornerstone from corporate tax liability before the government thought to look. The forfeiture clause in the 2018 operating agreement, the one Constance had insisted on and David had signed without reading closely, activated the day the civil settlement was executed. David Tate is in federal prison. He will be there for 7 years. He owes $2.7 million in court-ordered restitution. He is permanently barred from serving as an officer, director, member, or financial signatory of any business entity incorporated or operating in North Carolina for the duration of supervised release. Cornerstone closed its best fiscal year on record in December. The IRS clearance letter is framed in Constance's office. Zora's floor plans are on the refrigerator. The math is correct. It has always been.
Subscribe to Shattered Crown Stories TV. A new story every single day. Justice is always served here.